Hey everyone, Jeremy Knauff here with another episode of the Public Relations Declassified live stream. And we're going to talk about a topic that is something that tends to take place earlier in the process when it comes to publicity. And that is 5 red flags that make a journalist less likely to feature you. Now, this is something that's really important because however you contact a journalist, whether you're reaching out to them and pitching them, or they happen to see you, meet you somewhere, and they ask you for your insight for an article or a TV segment or something like that, what's going to happen before they actually do feature you is they're going to go and look you up online. And what they find is going to determine whether or not they feature you, right? So this is why it's so important to craft our entire online presence. So we're going to unpack these 5 red flags that will tell a journalist that you're not the person to feature, so that you guys can make sure that you're not throwing those red flags out there, that you're making the right impression, and that you're demonstrating that you are the type of expert that they need to feature. Now, the first is having no presence on social media. I think we're at a point where most people understand the importance of social media, but there are still some people who are not active on social, right? And this is more prevalent in some industries than others. So, I work with a lot of people in the real estate industry, some people in the medical industry, technology, things like that. Generally, these folks don't have that problem, especially not to the degree that I see some people in other industries make. So, for example, there was a period of time when we did a lot of work with the construction industry, particularly commercial construction. And these guys, great humans, they were great at what they did. They understood their trade phenomenally well, but they had no grasp of technology, and they just believed that social media was where, young kids get out there and post stupid videos that have no value or meaning, right? And look, the reality is there's a lot of people that post stupid content that has no value and meaning, but social media does give people an insight into you and your brand. So a couple of things to think about here. One is that you don't need 1 million followers. You also don't need, and when I say 1 million just as a random number, right? What I'm saying here is it's not so much about the follower count. That does matter a little bit. We'll talk more about it shortly, but it's not just about numbers, right? So if you've got, let's say hypothetically, you did have 1 million followers, right? That's pretty easy to do. Actually, you could buy a whole bunch of fake bot followers. But then that's going to make the other things that you're doing wrong look even worse. And we'll talk about how that plays out in a minute here. So don't get too focused on the number of followers. You want an audience, but you want it to be a more active and engaged audience. The other thing is that you don't have to be everywhere. There's a fair amount of social media platforms, right? We all know about Facebook and Instagram. We all probably have a LinkedIn profile. You've got X, you've got YouTube, you've got Rumble, you've got Threads, you've got Blue Sky. There are a ton of platforms. You don't need to be super active on every single platform. It certainly helps, but when it comes down to having an active and engaged presence on one platform or 2 platforms or whatever the number is, versus being spread too thin and having profiles everywhere, but not being able to actively create content and actively engage on those platforms is a problem. Now, you do need a profile on every major platform, and that's because first, it helps to prevent other people from impersonating you. And sometimes this may be intentional, sometimes it may be accidental. Something I have found is that there's a lot of people that use the same name as my company, Spartan Media. So that obviously could present a problem for me if somebody else is out there acting as Spartan Media. And in a lot of cases, they even have similar logos. I've even had people flat out copy my logo. And there's ways to deal with that. That's something we can talk about in another episode. But you want to make sure that at the bare minimum, you own your profile. And when I say profile, I don't just mean have a profile up there, but ideally you should have the same handle everywhere. So for us, for the company name anyway, it's Spartan Media Inc. is what we've got on the handle of all of our profiles. And when I say handle, what I'm talking about is if you look up in the address bar of your browser, It'll have, x.com or facebook.com or whatever. Everything after the .com / or however they structure it. I know X does it a little bit different. I think it's at and then the handle. But basically, the end of that URL is your handle. And if you have that consistently everywhere, then that's the ideal way to set that up. You don't want to have, Spartan Media at one place and then Spartan Media Inc. somewhere else, and then Spartan Media official or, bullshit like that. You want it to be the same handle on all of your profiles, even if you're not actively using them. And I always recommend to our clients, own a platform, own a profile on every platform, even if you don't intend to use it, or if you don't intend to use it right away. That way you've got it, it's there, you've secured it. So that's critical. You also want to make sure you've got a good professional headshot and a solid cover profile, right? That's the little thing up at the top across the like your Facebook profile or your Facebook business page or your X profile, any of those. And that cover profile, or that cover photo rather, is going to display differently on a desktop versus a mobile device. And every single platform has a different size. And in some cases, different types of profiles within a platform could have different sizes. So for example, last time I checked, a Facebook profile, your personal profile versus a Facebook page actually have different cover photo sizes. Then, the two are different. So we want to make sure that we've got a consistent cover photo and headshot across all platforms. But just keep in mind, you're going to have to change the dimensions of that cover photo on each platform because they all behave a little bit differently. They've got different sizes for those images. If you are a member of the Spartan community, that's the private VIP membership, we actually have Photoshop templates that are perfectly laid out, and they've got all the guides for everything, so you can drag your stuff into it and design your cover photos right there in that document, and it will show you exactly how it's going to look on a desktop and a mobile device. So if you are a member of the Spartan community, pop into the portal, which you all have access to, and you can download those Photoshop templates for free. All right, and then you also want to make sure you have a link to your website to drive people back to your official website. Now, content is critical here. And what I mean by that is it's not enough just to have the profile. You have to be active. You have to be creating and publishing useful content that other people can benefit from. And this is not so much just to teach people. Like, obviously you want to do that, but the real value in this is that it's demonstrating your expertise. Now, in order for that to work, it has to be useful. It has to be engaging, right? People want to actually have to consume this content, whether they're reading something or they're watching a video. And it has to be original, right? Don't take some video or some article that somebody else wrote and post it as your own. Create the original content. That if you are basically copying other people's content, it's going to reflect poorly on you, because what happens if somebody has already seen the original, now they see that you've copied it? That has a negative impact on your credibility. But the other side is it doesn't match your personality. And so people are going to feel a sense of something being off, so they won't engage with it as effectively as they would with whoever it was that originally created it. Now, the key point that I always like to look at when it comes to content is people should be able to use the information from that content, even if they never do business with you in any way, shape, or form. And when you can create content like that, that demonstrates your expertise in a way that a journalist can look at it and say, hey, this guy or this girl is really an expert and they know what they're talking about, and they likely can provide a lot of insight to my audience. Now, I talked earlier about how followers matter, but not in the way that most people think. So, I did mention, we said 1 million in that example. It's not as much about the follower count. It's more about the engagement. So likes, shares, and comments. If nobody's engaging with your content, that signals to a journalist who's looking at your social media that maybe you're not that much of an expert. Maybe you aren't really an authority, because if you were, other people in your industry and other prospects that you may potentially work with would be engaging with your content, either to ask questions or to thank you for creating this for in a way that provides them value. So we want to make sure that people are engaging. And if they're not, that's a sign that your content is not really doing its job. Now, comments are the most important here because that takes the most effort, right? Anyone can click a like button. Anyone can click a share or a retweet button. That's easy. That's low hanging fruit. But if they're going to take the time out of their day to comment, that means that your content was beyond what most content out there is. It shows that people value your content and, more importantly, your insight. And don't make the mistake of just posting something and then moving on. Make sure that if people are engaging with your content, you want to come back and try to reply to every single comment. You want to like their comments. And when you're doing that, first of all, you're creating engagement, which keeps more people coming back to your profile, but you're also further demonstrating your expertise, right? If you can carry on a conversation about a topic and just go back and forth on it, that shows that you have the ability to think on your feet and that you really understand this stuff. Okay, so the next red flag is irrelevant social media content. Now, look, I'm not saying that everything that you post has to be 100% about business. I don't do that. I post a fair amount of stuff that is not strictly business. And usually when I'm doing that, it's something humorous or some topic that I'm very passionate about. But I like to look at that as a kind of an 80-20 rule. Now, this is important because non-business content can demonstrate your personality, and that gives a journalist more reasons to potentially feature you in an article or in a TV segment because they can see who you are and how you carry yourself, and they get kind of a sense, and that gives them something to connect to. And if there's something for them to connect to, then it's likely that their audience will connect with you as well, right? What you're saying will resonate with them. So this is important, but you have to be very careful because your views can alienate some journalists. If we look at this from the political angle, let's be honest, a lot of journalists are left-leaning. So if you have more conservative ideologies, being very vocal about that could potentially hurt your chances of getting featured by certain journalists. Now, personally, myself, I don't really care. I look at it from the perspective of I'm going to authentically be who I am. I'm going to say the things that matter to me. And if somebody doesn't want to feature me because of that, so be it. There's lots of journalists out there. The difference between me and a lot of other people, though, is I have a ton of media features out there that demonstrate my authority. So I can get away with being a little bit more vocal about some things that some journalists may not like and still get featured. If you don't have that kind of wealth of publicity already out there, it may be a little bit harder for you. Now, I don't want you to think I'm saying you should, silence yourself or be somebody you're not. I would never say that. I think you need to be authentically who you are, but you have to look at everything that you're posting strategically, right? Does that potentially help you get closer to your goals in some way? So the other side of this is if you're all over the place, it can make you look unfocused. So I have a concept that I use called the 5 pillars, and I've got 5 core topics that every piece of content I post will be about one or more of those topics. Now, sometimes I can leverage that in a way where I'm using something else, some trending topic or something that's going on in the world that I can tie that to one of my pillars and bring something that's not necessarily in my 5 pillars. I can bring it into them. So a good example of this is when the Blake Lively PR crisis was going down around that whole movie. I forget what the name of the movie was, but it was basically this conflict between her and oh God, I forget the guy's name. You guys probably know what I'm talking about, though. It's something I posted a fair amount of content on X, especially, and I was not looking at it from a pop culture perspective. I hate that shit. I have no interest in pop culture or Hollywood, any of that stuff. But I was approaching it purely from a PR perspective, and I was evaluating the decisions and actions that she was making and talking about how that impacted her personal brand from a PR perspective. And by tying those together, I managed to take a trending topic tie it to public relations. And so now I get all of the benefit of that trending topic, but I'm using it to demonstrate my expertise. So I'm taking a real world situation that everyone can look at. They see exactly what's going on. They see the news, they see what's going on social. And then I'm breaking it down in kind of an academic way from a PR perspective. And that is a way to take something that's not business and make it business, and really further demonstrate expertise. Because look, the reality is a lot of people in the PR industry couldn't necessarily do that. They can't really take something on the fly and talk about it in the moment, right? You get them to sit down and, they could probably write an article about it in a few hours with a whole bunch of research, but not everybody can do that on the fly. And that really is a great way to demonstrate your expertise. So find a way to do that in your industry. If you're going to post something that's not specifically business or not specifically related to your business or your industry, find a way to tie that topic into your business or your industry. And that will help you to kind of create a more natural profile, right? You're authentically being who you are, but at the same time, you're still building your personal brand. You're still demonstrating your expertise. Okay. Few or poor reviews are another red flag. Now, if you go look somebody up online, go pop them into Google, go pop them into Bing, if they don't see some reviews for that company, for that person, for that brand, that's going to be a red flag, because reviews indicate how people who have actually worked with you feel about your expertise. Did you actually solve the problem that they came to you to have solved? And if you don't have good reviews, or worse yet, you have poor reviews, that's going to make a journalist question your expertise, because you should, at the very least, be able to keep your customers, your clients happy. That's the bare minimum when it comes to, being an expert in your field. So you need to make sure that you are out here getting legitimate reviews from your clients, and you want to do that on an ongoing basis. Now, a couple of things we need to look at here. Reviews on your own website generally don't matter, because, anyone can put, hey, this is the best company in the world, Tom S., right? Like, who the fuck is Tom S.? So there's no way to verify that these are real people. Now, there's a caveat here. If you have video testimonials, like if you look at Spartan Media's website, we've got a bunch of video testimonials from people who are legitimate business owners. You can see their face. They're talking about their experience in working with us. Those on your website carry some weight. But generally speaking, we want to have reviews on third-party platforms like your Google business profile, your Facebook business page, Yelp, third-party review platforms like that. Now, let's talk about what matters when it comes to reviews. The first is quantity. More is always better. The higher the count that somebody sees, it indicates that you're doing more business with more people, and that they felt that they got enough out of that they're willing to come over here and post a positive review for you and about you. That's important. The other is the rating, right? If it's a bunch of 3-star reviews, that's not a very good look. But if you've got 5-star reviews, that means you're going above and beyond. You're batting it out of the park, and people are exceedingly happy with what you're providing. But when it comes to these reviews, substance really matters. So just posting a 5-star review versus posting a 5-star review with a write-up about their experience, that is a big difference, right? Anybody can go and click 5 stars and submit. Not everybody is going to be willing to actually sit down and write a review about their experience with you. So the fact that they've taken the time to write something carries more weight. The other is context. So when we're working with clients, we tell them to help their client tell the story about their experience with them. So it's not just, hey, Acme Plumbing is the best, or, Joe's real estate coaching is the best, or whatever. We want them to really get into the story, right? What problem did they have when they came to your company? What were they trying to solve? And then what did the process look like? And then what was the outcome? And the more information that they can put in there, the more effective that review is going to be, the more impact it will have, because people can go through this story and kind of envision themselves going through that same process. They know that they've got a particular problem. Maybe it's the same problem as that person in that review had. And now they can see how you could help them solve that problem, and they can envision what the potential outcome is. So this is critical. More is better, but you want to give them kind of a framework to put that together, because most people can't write well. Most people don't like to write. So if you make it hard for them, they're probably not going to. And then consistency. So it's not a good sign if you're not consistently getting new reviews, right? We want to make sure that as often as possible, we're getting new reviews from new clients. Now, your model is going to determine your frequency. If you've got a low ticket service or product, then you're going to have more people buying your product or service, and you have the opportunity to have more frequent reviews, right? If it's something that somebody's just going to buy, immediately implement, and get the results pretty quickly, well, then it makes sense that more people can post more reviews more quickly. If you've got something more high ticket, like a concierge type service, you're doing one-on-one coaching, or you're helping them with a particularly large type of transaction or something like that, then you're going to have fewer transactions. So you're going to have new reviews less often. But whatever the case is, you want that to be consistent. You don't want it to be, 50 new reviews today and then nothing for 6 months or 12 months, right? You want it to be consistent. And, exactly how that plays out is going to vary depending on your industry, depending on who you're working with, things like that. But the more consistent it is, the more effective it'll be, right? Side note, consistent reviews also help with your Google Business Profile ranking for non-branded terms as well. So this is important. But these reviews, they have a huge impact on how a journalist sees you, and they determine how likely they're going to be to feature you in the media. Okay, so another red flag is reputational images in the search results. So reviews are a big part of that. If somebody searches for your personal name and you've got a Facebook page or a Google Business Profile or whatever, but especially with your company name, which most companies have reviews on various platforms these days. So if you've got negative reviews, then that is a big reputational issue. You've also got forums or other types of communities like Reddit or Quora or things like that. So I see this a lot in the coaching industry. Somebody will come into Reddit and they'll say, hey, is so-and-so, insert name here, John Smith, whatever. Is John Smith legit, or is he a scam real estate coach? That type of shit tends to rank pretty well in the search results, because these forums and these online communities tend to have a lot of domain authority. The search engines see them as authoritative URLs. So the content on them tends to rank pretty high. So if you've got stuff like that out there, that can cause a big problem for you. And let's say you are legit, but you have people just even asking the question, that puts that sense of doubt in a journalist's mind. So if you've got issues like that, you definitely want to get them taken care of. You want to go in there and address the claims, address the concerns, maybe even reach out to whoever the moderators are of that forum and, see if maybe it violates the rules of that particular forum, the subreddit, whatever. And there may be some cases where you can get those taken down if that's the case. It just really depends on the circumstances, but those can have a big impact on you. Independent media is another one. And when I say independent media, in this case, I'm not talking about necessarily independent media outlets, like some small to medium sized outlet that's not like a traditional media, like a TV channel or Forbes or Entrepreneur or something. I'm talking blog posts. I'm talking podcasts. I'm talking social media. All of these things potentially can rank for your name. And if somebody is out here doing something that is presenting a negative image of you and your brand, that can definitely impact your chances of getting featured in the media. And then, of course, traditional media. If you've got big media outlets, your local TV station, some industry publication, some major media outlet like Entrepreneur, Inc., Fast Company, publishing something negative about you, then that can be a huge problem. And those tend to rank very well also. There was just an article that I came across last night about this real estate company that was doing this particular model of creative financing. And they were basically uh, acquiring homes from people who were in financial situations. Nothing inherently wrong with the model, but they executed it poorly. They weren't able to keep up with the payments. And those people, as a result of this real estate company, ended up, a lot of them, losing their homes, but still being responsible for paying the cost. So that company's name is now trashed, and rightfully so, right? They deserved every bit of that because they actually harmed people financially in a big way. But when you've got media outlets covering you, whether it's you personally or your company name, that can have a tremendous negative impact on whether a journalist is likely to feature you or not, because they don't want to feature someone who is uh, someone that they would see as detrimental to putting in front of their audience, somebody who may give them bad advice or may scam them or harm them in some way. So if you've got these kind of issues, these reputational issues in the search results, you need to get them fixed. And if you can't make them go away, then you need to find ways to get positive stuff out there. And this is something we've talked about in some of the previous episodes. I know we talked about a few things on controlling the search results for your name. And I think that was actually last week's episode. But no, that wasn't last week. I don't remember. Anyway, it is in a previous Public Relations Declassified episode. But having this negative reputational issues in the search results can dramatically impact your ability to get featured in the media. And finally, we've got the inability to communicate effectively is a huge red flag to journalists. So can you convey your thoughts in a way that the average person can understand? Now, if I'm talking to other industry professionals, I'm going to use particular terminology. I'm going to assume certain knowledge. I'm going to take some things for granted. I'm going to assume that they know things that I already know. I may use industry terminology or acronyms, or I may refer to tools, resources, organizations that they may know, but somebody else may not. But if you're talking to somebody outside of your industry, which for the most part, a media outlet's audience is going to be outside of your industry, right? That's why they're coming to you to get your expertise on this topic. You need to be able to communicate in a way that they understand. The journalists are communicating with the masses, not necessarily industry professionals. Now, there's a caveat here, and that is that if you're doing something in a trade publication, something specific to your industry, then you don't have to worry about that as much. The other thing is, can you carry on a conversation on the fly? Now, there's a couple of aspects to this, both in the terms of how you engage in the comments. Like if somebody's asking you a question, can you clearly answer that? Can you do it pretty quickly? Does that just kind of flow? Or do you come back like a day later? Does it take you all this time to come up with an answer? But also video. So if you're out here creating video, you've got a live stream, you've got a podcast, whatever, and you can communicate back and forth in a dialogue on the fly, that's a good sign to journalists. If you can't, if there's a lot of stuttering and stammering, you can't communicate clearly, lots of ums and ahs and, phrases like, and things like that, then that kind of makes journalists a little bit less likely to feature you. So when we talk about carrying on a conversation on the fly, there's a few key aspects here. One is clarifying. So if somebody asks you a question, you want to be able to, so you've made a post, you've expressed a particular point of view, and then somebody comes on and asks you a question. You want to be able to answer that question in a way that they now understand your original point significantly better. There's also debate, right? So somebody may come on and say, well, I think this is wrong because of X. You need to be able to clearly articulate why you disagree with them. And, I would highly advise you not to get pissy with people. People are going to have their opinions, they're going to have their views, but arguing with them is probably not going to really suit you. You want to be able to convey why you believe that you're right. And then beyond that, you also have to be able to expand. So if you're talking about a particular thing and somebody asks you a question or they say something that indicates that they don't quite understand your point, you need to be able to go deeper on that point to provide even more information, even more context that makes it easier for people to understand. And that ability to go back and forth with people in the comments or in a podcast interview and clarify, debate, or expand on your views, tells a journalist that you really know what you're talking about and that you'll be a good person to interview. If you can't do that, then it's going to hurt your chances of getting featured. So how do we engage? Well, you want to have a calm as opposed to an adversarial demeanor, right? Like I said, don't get pissy when you start talking with them. Don't, you know, argue with them, just state what you believe. And it's as simple as that, right? And this is the difference between debating the ideas versus attacking people. So I see a lot of people, someone will come in and say, "Oh, well, I don't agree with you. I think you're wrong." And they will start throwing out ad hominem attacks on the person, right? They'll attack their character, they'll attack their looks, they'll say, mean things about them just because they don't agree with their point of view, right? And we're talking, in this case, we're talking specific to business, specific to your industry. We're not talking about these wonderful political debates that everyone has on social media. That's an entirely different beast. I'm talking about as you're in the context of industry specific stuff, right? So you want to debate the idea, not attack the person or their character. The other is the appeal to authority. So I've seen a lot of cases where somebody says, "Well, here's what I believe. Here's how things are done in the industry, or how things should be done." And then someone will come along and say, "Well, I don't agree with that, and here's why." And someone will come, and then that person will come back and say, "Well, I've been in the industry for 15 years, or I have a doctorate, or I'm a professor at this university, or whatever." That doesn't matter. Those are a logical fallacy called appeal to authority, and it doesn't actually reinforce your point. The fact that you have a PhD, or the fact that you've done something for 15 years, 20 years, 30 years, whatever it is, none of that matters if you cannot articulate why you believe you're correct. And the ability to engage, to go back and forth on these topics in a calm manner, in a rational and a logical manner, that is critical for a journalist, because an interview could take a number of different directions and things can go in unexpected directions very quickly. And so they want to know that you're going to be able to adapt on the fly, especially when it comes to TV, because if they ask you a question and things kind of go sideways and you start, glitching out, then that TV segment kind of goes to hell. If you guys want to see a fun example of that, there was one that I did on NASDAQ TV where it was a panel with the host and 3 guests. I was one of the guests. There was this woman on the panel, and she completely, like, her brain froze, like that Windows blue screen of death. Absolute shit show. And as a result, she's never been back on TV since then. It's the most painful TV segment that I think I've ever seen. It was everything I could do not to just crack up laughing during this interview. But they want to know that things like that are not going to happen. So when a journalist goes and they look you up online and they're looking at how you're engaging on social media, on podcasts, what they see is going to tell them whether or not you'll be a good person to feature based on how you can reply back and forth, how you can engage in the conversation. So if you cannot do that, it's a huge red flag, and it will reduce the chances of you getting featured in the media. All right, guys. So that's 5 red flags that make a journalist less likely to feature you. So go through your content, go through your personal brand, your search results, all of this stuff, and look at what we talked about today, right? Are you exhibiting any of these red flags? Are you presenting a positive impression? Are you presenting green flags, right? If you guys want to get featured in the media, you have to make sure that you're not throwing up these red flags, and better yet, that you are throwing up green flags that show them that you're the person to feature. So that being said, we're going to roll into Jeremy's PR PSA for today. And that is that you don't get to declare your own expert status. You have to clearly and consistently demonstrate it, and the public is always the final arbiter. So I don't care how long you've been doing what you're doing. I don't care what industry accolades or awards you have, or what kind of titles you may have. None of that matters. All that matters is how the public perceives you. If they perceive you as an expert, great. You're in an amazing position. If they don't perceive you as an expert, simply telling them that you are is not going to change that. You have to demonstrate it. And what we talked about today are 5 great ways to demonstrate that. right? So these are red flags. So you want to get these right so that in your case, they will be green flags. That is going to dramatically increase your chances of getting featured in the media so that you can develop that authority status, which then helps you to attract more opportunities and earn more money, which is what we all want to do, right? All right, guys. So that's going to be a wrap for today. If you guys found value in this, I'd love it if you'd drop us a comment, share this with someone you think can find value in it. And I will see you all on the next video. See you guys next week. Take care, everyone.